Hi, kiddos. Welcome back to Self Life, the podcast where I start to treat myself like I have always treated my partners in the past. You know how they say you can't love anybody else until you love yourself, you can't receive love until you love yourself. Well, I am practicing that for the first time in my life. Hence, self life. I am now a wife to myself. I give to myself, I feed myself, I nurture myself, I love myself, I show compassion and patience to myself. I'm a good wife to myself. And I'm excited, first of all, that I'm even doing an episode at all because I have been so brain dead for the last couple of months because of my dad's health issues, but I'm starting to get my brain back. And I'm very excited about today's episode because I have my lifelong friend, Colleen. She is an adjunct professor. She's a licensed clinical social worker, and she and I grew up in the same church together, which our church was so small. And when I left the faith altogether, I lost contact with everybody because you can't really leave the faith and continue communicating with people who are still in the faith. That's rather contentious, or at least it had been in my experience of leaving the faith. And so I really lost touch with a lot of people, Colleen included. She was when I first left the faith, she was still attending church. And, when you are a Christian for so long and then you're not anymore, it's how do you communicate with the Christians who are still believers? You know what I mean? And what's interesting is that we've been back in contact recently as I've been doing so much work around understanding myself, healing myself. I've been through a lot throughout my life and lots of trauma and really just always trying to get my head on straight. And some of the self exploration that I've been doing lately has been remembering that I was raised according to James Dobson's book, The Strong Willed Child, which explains a lot about how my mom treated me, explains a lot about how she treated me, but then there are also just personal things that she brought to the table that made my experience growing up horrible and I just couldn't win and is something that I'll probably be recovering from forever. And I've been talking about it. I've been talking about it on this podcast. I made a TikTok series about James Dobson and the harm that that book caused me. And according to the responses and the comments that I've received on TikTok when talking about James Dobson, hundreds of thousands of children were harmed because of this book. And in talking about that publicly, Colleen reached out and she said, I just want you to know that you were never a strong willed child. And that sentence healed me. It's like I've had to do so much work around recognizing that I'm not a horrible, demonic, worthless monster because that's how I was treated by my mom and how this book really guides parents to treat their children. And a lot of the way I was treated is really present in the whole Ruby, Frankie, Jody Hildebrandt case and what those children were put through. Colleen and I talk about that. She has been really validating in swooping in and being a co-historian of my experience because she was right there. I mean, she was in my home, I was in her home. We were a part of each other's lives, Colleen and I, ever since she came to the church. And that was when she was 15 and I was around 7 or 8. And so being back in touch with her as she has also left the faith for her own reasons has been incredibly healing and incredibly validating and has really helped me to just go, okay, I knew who I was. I knew I wasn't a demon child, like I was treated. I wanted to please my mom and I wanted to do right by her. And I was always trying to catered to her demands and I just never could and I just felt so worthless all the time. And in talking with Colleen, she shares her own experiences with my mom. She shares her mom's experiences with my mom, which neither of us knew about until recently. And in this conversation, we just talk about what it was like for us growing up in the specific church that we did, which was very small and very niche. We talk about our journey away from the doctrine that we both subscribed to and that we both really dedicated our entire lives to. We were both very active in the church. Her more so than I cuz she was 15 at the time. She was a teenager. She had a little more agency. She also came to the church on her own. Her family wasn't with her. And so she ran the youth group and she they really put her to work. And so I was a part of the youth group, and she and I were just very much a part of the church. So this conversation is about deconstruction. It's about our relationships with ourselves and our ideals and how our beliefs have changed, how we've had to rehaul our beliefs about not only ourselves, but the world, because our political affiliations have changed. I actually learned in this conversation that she was more progressive than I was, and then my family was, than my mom was, but she was always afraid to say that because, you can be ostracized for that type of stuff. We relive a little bit of trauma and also just dive into some fun memories, because something that I've realized I'm so grateful for is that Colleen, because my mom trusted her so much and she, was a fellow Christian and we were both dedicated to the church, she gave me a place to go. And I was not allowed to go to very many people's houses at all. And my house was a very dark, sad, scary place. And so to have her in my life at that time, all throughout those years, and have someone who was like allowed to take me out of my house and just like show me a glimpse of, life outside of my home, which was just like friendly and compassionate and casual and fun. And we definitely had a lot of fun together. And we talk a little bit about like trying to find our way after taking off the God glasses, after removing the one lens that we were taught to view everything through. Like, what is life like when you remove that lens? So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hi, Colleen. Thank you for being so patient while I troubleshot for the last 4 hours.
You are so welcome.
We plan to start at 10 a.m. It is 2:19 p.m., but we got it all figured out. And here we go. I'm so happy to have you on as a guest because, yay, I know. We've known each other. I've known you the longest out of anybody else in my life. That's not my family,
Yeah.
I like have not stayed in touch with people from Apple Valley like at all. So it's really cool.
Yeah. I think it's been what, 30-ish years, 30 plus
Yeah.
years.
So Colleen and I went to the same church. That's how we met, in the high desert in Southern California. And she was 15 and I was like 7 or 8. Is that
Like
right?
8. Yeah.
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 And then we became so close. You were like we talked about this recently. You were like one of the only people that my mom trusted that I was like allowed to be around. So like we spent so much time together. It like I feel like you and I, both of our lives were really centered around the church. And so it made sense that we did. Like obviously we saw each other at church, but we saw each other during the week, and we went to a lot of church functions. Like we went to teen camp, we went to family camp, we went to Spirit West Coast.
Well, I didn't go to Spirit West Coast, but
You
yeah,
didn't?
I didn't. I never went.
Wait, why?
I don't know. I wanted to go. I remember wanting to go, but I never went. I don't know why I didn't ever go.
Oh my God, I totally just assumed you were there. That's so funny. Okay.
But all the other things, yes. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And youth group, which you were the leader of youth group.
Yes.
Yeah. And so basically, what I'm so curious to talk to you about is, so just to give the listener a little bit of background, Colleen and I were roommates. You were I moved out of, well, I was kicked out of my house, and then I lived with my dad briefly, and both situations were just really bad and I needed to get out. And then you were ready and willing to share an apartment, but pay more for your room, because I was also in a position where I was in school full time. And I was like, maybe, yeah, I was working part-time at schools, like in before and after school programs, but just did not have enough money to move out. And so you were like, let's share a space. We moved to Rancho Cucamonga. You were making more than me, so you were able to pay a little bit more than me. And that was like my first taste of freedom, was moving in with you in Rancho Cucamonga.
Yeah.
And so, and then I moved more west into Los Angeles with a high school friend of mine who was moving back into the States, and was like, let's get a place in Los Angeles. And I was very much at this time like, okay, just like whatever experiences are being presented to me, that's fine. And then I ended up, I think, leaving Christianity before you did. And when I left Christianity, I stopped talking to my Christian friends because I didn't know how to communicate that. And I also knew it was like frowned upon to leave. And then also, so in this episode, for everyone listening, we are going to be talking about my mom. I typically don't like to use that word because there's so much pain in it for me. So when Colleen and I talk privately, we use names, but obviously I'm not going to use names in the podcast episode. So I was used to the type of Christianity that my mom displayed, which was like obviously me leaving the faith it was me running into the open arms of Satan. You know what I mean? Like it was just every single thing that I did or said after I made it clear that I was exploring other belief systems and sort of like didn't fully act when I was out on my own. I was like, I don't actually fully believe all of this stuff that I've been forced to believe. And I was just seen as basically like possessed by a demon. And so I also got negative feedback from other Christian friends when I started to express like, oh, I'm thinking differently now about like a woman's right to choose. And I was just absolutely chewed out for that. And so I just like avoided having more of those conversations. And so you and I lost touch and then we got back into touch recently. And do you think that part of the reason that we were able to get back into touch is because you also like left the faith in so many ways?
I think there was part of that, but I think I think led me to reach out. I think was also like you starting the podcast and sharing more of your story, and then like just really knowing because I knew how you grew up, and I think hearing the story of you like disconnecting with your mom and all that stuff, and I think some of the things that she had said about you and all these things like just emphasizing that like the thoughts that you had, I think, about yourself in childhood, the things that she reinforced for you were not. And I wanted to really reinforce, like, I really felt like I needed to tell you that and be like, this is not the truth about you. Like, you were not a bad kid. You were just like, it's just always wanting to please people, really, and wanting to please her. And like, she just had such a warped view of who you were. And I really felt like when I was hearing at least I feel like it was even the first episode of this
Mm.
podcast that I was just like, I want to make sure that you know that is not who you are. And I felt like you had gone through enough healing to like understand that, but I just wanted to reinforce as a voice from you that time too.
Yeah. And I'm crying already.
No.
And I have full body chills because so I started to dive back into James Dobson and the strong-willed child, and honestly posting on TikTok is what really alerted me because I got thousands upon thousands of comments immediately from people being like, "Oh, my mom also raised me with that book. I also don't talk to her. It was so abusive. We had to go no contact." And I had forgotten about that book. I had completely forgotten about the book. But when it was like the first comment I saw of somebody saying, "Yep, James Dobson's teachings," I went, oh my God, yes. That book was touted. Like she used to recommend that book to other people because she loved using it to raise me. And so I started reading it and I did a whole series on TikTok about how it's just a guide to abuse. And I was having so many realizations, like realizing that one of the main reasons she treated me like I was never enough. I was always falling short of the glory of God, like always imperfect, needing to be criticized, needing to be punished is because that book teaches
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
directly and explicitly. If your kid looks at you funny, that kid's on their way to jail and then hell, and that's your fault, and you got to beat it out of them. And
Yeah.
I did. I started posting about that a lot, and I'll never forget the message from you where you just said, "I just want you to know you are not a strong-willed child." I like it was so healing for me. You were right. I was at a place where hearing that was it was so healing. That's the perfect word for it because I have been doing obviously. I will always have to be I think working on fixing the parts of me that were broken and I've been doing that diligently since 25, but I hadn't until that TikTok series where we were exploring that book. I hadn't looked into maybe other reasons beyond Christianity and beyond within the
Yeah.
person, right? That was like that I was on the receiving end of. I always wanna, like, choose
Right.
my language carefully. Um,
Right.
and it was so yeah, because I was with you always. You were right there. You knew me, you know my mom. you saw a lot of it. Obviously, a lot of it was behind closed doors, but I don't think, she's not really the type of person, I don't think, that's like completely different in public where people can't possibly imagine. I think it just gets a little bit more extreme behind closed
Yeah.
doors, but you
Yeah.
witnessed extreme, like,
Yes.
punishment and, like, tell me from your perspective, like, what you witnessed.
I would just see that she would take like the smallest thing that you would do and blow it up like it was like the most disrespectful thing that you ever could have done. And then just any little thing, like she did not want you to be your own person at all. Like she was just like everything had to be through the lens of like her perception really of like the church and everything else, and was like, okay, like everybody kind of needs to know, be in your business, this is what you're supposed to do as a Christian. Just pound it into you where it's like you can only listen to like Christian music, you can only watch things that are just okay for Christians, like not rated R, not, which
Oh, I mean,
is
even
I know
even
Prince
some
was not.
PG and G movies, she'd be like, "Oh, I didn't like
Well,
that seemed rude, like, this PG movie is off the list." Well, okay.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And trying to describe her is just like such a like it's such a loaded question, I feel like,
I
because
know.
it's just like it's like hard to describe who she is. But I think maybe describing even like because she even did it to me. And that was
Yes.
the thing where it was like she even said, well, she pulled me aside at a different point and said, sat me down as like a 15, probably 15, 16-year-old and said,
So this would have been the first couple years that we were
yeah,
friends.
yeah, well,
Mhm.
and
And
yeah, I mean,
you were babysitting me, and yeah, and
yeah,
also for the listener, I just learned this story recently, but, so yeah, my mom pulled you aside and
yes. She told me that I was my shorts were too short. It was unacceptable that I was wearing like spaghetti straps, that I was not setting a good example for you. That oh, and then she also commented that she thought that it was a negative thing that I was like wearing a thong. And she mentioned that I was,
oh,
and I was
yeah.
like, how do you know that I'm wearing a thong? Like it was very creepy.
Invasive, and
Yeah.
but you're a teenager, and so you're like, "Oh, okay," but she was
Yeah.
really obsessed with the G-string thing with me as well, and I
Yeah.
wasn't allowed to wear them because she said, I mean, the way she knew is she checked for a panty line because she used to say, like, if we're at church and a man looks at your butt and can't see that there's an underwear line, you have just invited him to picture you naked." So that's why she said she looked for an underwear line, didn't see one, and thought it was
Yeah.
appropriate to bring that up to you.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So she told me
Like,
that
what
that
kind of underwear you're wearing? Like,
right.
oh my god,
It was
it's
like
so invasive.
yeah, and that I was such a bad like, I was being a bad influence on you,
Yep.
essentially. So I was like, okay. And then I also recently found out because of our conversations and bringing this up, I had mentioned something to my mom, and she apparently at some point had had a conversation with my mom. I did not know about this until recently, that she was claiming that I was out of control, and she recommended that my mom read the Dobson book to get me back under control. Oh,
Sorry,
and
go
she
ahead.
told my mom she was a bad mom. She told her she was a horrible mother. So, which
And did when you brought this up with your mom recently, didn't you say that your mom, like, got overwhelmed and couldn't even discuss
yeah,
it?
she was saying, I mean, she was like starting to tear up, and she was like her voice was just breaking, and she just said, "Well, we'll have to talk about it another time." And so I don't know the full story of that, but just the fact that she would even say that. I mean, she didn't my mom didn't go to church. My mom, like,
Right.
didn't, and I think that was her whole thing too, is that she was saying that my mom was a horrible mother because I think it was related to, like, her not going to church.
Oh, it wasn't
Why?
specifically your shorts and spaghetti straps?
Probably, I would imagine there's stuff to that too, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and just to set the scene for those listening also, like, the demeanor, my mom's demeanor and the way that she speaks to people is
Mm,
very domineering. It is very self-assured. There is no doubt in her mind that she is 100% right. And it's almost as if like you're lucky she's even taking the time to tell you this because it's, it's a matter of life and death. It's a matter of your soul. Everything, every single thing I said and did was either sending me to hell or sending me to heaven. Everything is a matter of your soul,
mm,
even spaghetti straps or the length of your shorts, like that was my everyday existence. Like I always had to be thinking about, do I want to spend eternity in hell? This decision, and most
mm,
things according to her were sending me toward an eternity in hell, like wearing shorts that she deemed too short, wearing the wrong kind of underwear, wearing a spaghetti strap tank top. So it like doesn't, on one level, it doesn't surprise me that she would bring those up to you because they were issues for me as well. But it also does surprise me as an adult looking back because
right,
I would never like assert
right,
my personal beliefs about wardrobe
right.
on
Mhm,
a friend of the family.
right.
There was just the audacity, but she comes at everything with audacity, and that voice of authority, I didn't realize until I was doing some major healing in my mid to late 20s that my idea of the voice of God was just her. It was
Mm,
all her rhetoric, and the way I felt about myself and the way I felt about my place in the world was all her voice because she speaks with the authority of the voice of God. And so
mhm.
I'm sure I can picture it. I'm sure the way when she sat you down, you probably felt like, "Oh no." Like, how did you feel? Were you like, "Oh no, she's right and I've been scolded and I must be a bad influence," or how did you process that?
I feel like the way she talked about it, it was just very much like I felt a lot of shame out of, like, how she talked to me about it because it was just kind of, that I wasn't being a good Christian
Yeah.
because of how I was dressing.
Also, mind you, you were not like it wasn't like your ass was hanging out of your shorts. You were wearing like a normal pair of like I remember like you had like khaki Union Bay short,
Mhm.
like regular length, not even short shorts, okay?
Right. Mhm.
But, she kinda had the rule of kind of like school dress code, like you gotta put your hands down, it's gotta come to the tips of your
Yeah.
fingers type shit. But like
Mhm.
learning that she felt like she had every right to say that to you and I had no idea about her speaking to your mom. And so
I
hearing that,
neither.
oh,
So
she had not told you until recently?
no, she didn't until I told that time when I sent you that text that it was like that was when I found out. Was like I didn't know that at all
It's
before.
such a strange phenomenon too to hear these stories from you because on one hand, it's devastating that she would have had that conversation with another mother who she didn't know. She didn't know your mother.
Mhm.
And to make statements like that and to make them in her authoritarian
Mhm.
I'm here to tell you, God has a message for you. You're a horrible mother. That type of like I can feel it still. The fact that your mom also probably had to get off that call and
Mhm.
be like, "Oh, no." Like, is there the shame the feeling she is so good at filling you with shame, and that's one of my main efforts all the time is, like, removing the shame that she taught me was something that I should be feeling about everything all the time, like,
Right.
and I think about your mom is still impacted by one conversation to the point where she can't even speak about it without tearing up, and I'm like, "And the woman that did that to her, that was my mom." That was like
Right.
every single thing about my life was filtered through her. She controlled every single aspect of my life, and I just want you to know, like, the gift you gave me of just even saying, "I want you to know you weren't a strong-willed child," was beautiful because one part of why it was so difficult for me is because I was an only child and she was in control and I didn't have any co-historians. But I remember like one time I had a friend over and my friend and I both witnessed her. She had a lot of stuff that was hard to deal with, but one of the things was she would say something and you
Mhm.
would respond and
Mhm.
she would go, "What are you talking about?" And you would say, "What you just said." And she'd go, "I didn't say that." And obviously crazy making, and I remember having a friend over one time where we both heard it, And she,
Mhm.
my mom's in there, like, I'm down the hall, and she's like, "I didn't say that." I said, "You just said it." "No, I didn't. You're crazy." I went in and I got my friend. I said, "Did you just hear her say it?" And my friend goes, "Yeah." And my mom goes, "Well, you're both crazy." And so I don't think it would have mattered necessarily if I had a sibling to be a co-historian. She just would have been like, "Well, you're both possessed by the devil."
Right,
There
right.
was there was nobody could disagree with this woman or say that she was wrong, because she's not wrong. Another thing that Colleen and I have really been discussing a lot lately is the Ruby Franke Jodi Hildebrandt case, because while they are extremist Mormons, that whole ideology is so similar to James Dobson's ideology and the way that I was raised as well, which is, if you look at me funny, that means the devil is in you. And there's
Right.
everything is permissible when you as a parent are fighting with the devil, because the devil has gotten a hold of your children. So they make themselves believe that anything that they put their kids through on earth, which is the equivalent of creating hell for them in those cases, right,
Right.
is permissible because they are doing it to save their kids from an eternity of hell. This whole idea of let's create hell on earth to get the devil out so that they can spend eternity in heaven is so sick and backwards and twisted, but I recognize it because it was absolutely my experience as well. It was like her whole thing, her self-professed thing was like, you can hate me all you want. I'm doing God's work. This is because I care about your soul. So I'm going to treat you like absolute garbage. You're never going to be able to get through a day feeling even an ounce of joy, because I'm going to strip that from you. But don't worry. It's to send you to heaven for all of eternity. It's so backwards, but it's really strong marketing. And when we look at those cases like Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt, what those kids went through, the physical torture, I believe, as I've been reading through Dobson and really like unpacking a lot of what went on in my childhood, I believe I absolutely would have been cuffed if I were a strong-willed child.
Mhm. Yeah.
I
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
and like you said, like, I wanted to please her. I was trying so hard. There was no part of me that would have ever dared to be like, "No," or whatever, like, "I'm not doing that, mom."
Mhm.
The stuff I was getting in trouble for was asking questions, asking for clarification, looking at her the wrong way, having a slight, like, if she could tell I had anger, like
Mm.
rightful anger because I was being abused, that
Yeah.
was also totally, not allowed. And I didn't push it. And I
Right.
kind of feel like Ruby's kids, maybe more so the boys or something. I'm not saying all boys are rebellious and all girls aren't, but maybe a little more of that masculine energy of pushback. I didn't
Right.
have that.
No, I didn't.
And I think but I still got my mouth washed out with soap all the time. She carried the wooden spoon in her purse. I got hit with that
Mhm.
pretty often. Also, you know what I was thinking about yesterday?
Mm.
And this is so crazy. Remember when she kicked a young
Yeah.
child at our church
Yes.
as a
Yeah.
punishment?
Mhm. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
So she
Who was
there was
younger
a
than you,
kid.
by the way, too. Yeah.
He was well, how
He
old do you
was,
think he was at the
like,
time? 6, 7?
probably, yeah. He was
Because I would have been maybe 10.
I feel like he was probably not more than 6, I'm guessing.
So this young boy who, mind you, we had a playful relationship, but also he was kicking me. But it also, like, I wasn't afraid of him. Like, we were friends. But he was
Yeah.
kicking me, and I was, like, telling on him for kicking me, and my mom warned him that if he did it again, she would kick him, and that's exactly what she did. On church grounds, she took him into the children's church room, closed the door. I remember listening outside, and she fucking kicked this child who is not her child. But
Right.
that's another example of that. What? Like, now that I'm basically around the age that she was, or I think I'm older than she was at the time, or maybe not, but like, and also, especially because I went into teaching for students with special needs, like, I understand
Mhm.
behavioral support and behavior support plans when you don't kick a kid. But also, but even if
Wait,
I
what? You
hadn't,
don't kick kids? Not
that's the thing, like, it's not like if you weren't a licensed clinical social worker and I wasn't a former, teacher for students with special needs, that we would be like, "That was totally fine that you kicked the 6-year-old."
Right.
It reminds me, though, of Ruby Franke's justifications, because 'cause I've heard, some of the new news reports. I know you watched the 2020 special, and I have yet to watch it, but some of the new reports that are coming out are her and Jodi being like, "People just don't understand what it's like to have to fight with the devil, and we have done nothing wrong, and they don't understand that we love our kids and that we are being the best parents ever, and it just reminds me of my mom
Mhm.
so much.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the other part is that she very well knew his mother. So it's like
Yeah,
you can just go talk to his mom and say, and she would have taken, like, she would have done something about it.
yeah,
Like,
that's
it
a good
wasn't like
point.
his mom was, like, super lax about, like, "Oh, whatever, like, he'll do that," like, she would have, like, he would have had to have a consequence for that,
Right. I hadn't even
and
thought of that. I wonder what she did say to her. His mom probably knew, right?
I think she knew after your mom kicked him, like, she didn't know. She didn't know. I mean, it wasn't like she's, like, "Oh, yeah, he deserved to go be kicked. Go ahead and go take him in the room and kick him."
Wait,
Yep.
so I hadn't thought about that. I wonder what she would say. Although the thing about that church though, and tell me if you agree with this, is like everyone was kind of on the same wavelength. And there was a lot of extreme thinking. Like within other families, like for instance, I remember other families being like, "Oh, Disney's evil," or "Oh, we're writing a boycott letter to Carl's Jr. because the commercial that they're airing right now is
Mhm.
demonic," or whatever. Like, I think that extreme thinking was pretty prevalent in the church. And to also clarify, we went to a church that when we both started going was called a Wesleyan church. And it was like we taught the teachings of John Wesley, who was a Methodist preacher and had very extremist views. But then we actually changed and we no longer went by a Wesleyan church because from what I remember, they said people were starting to refer to it as a cult, the cult of John Wesley, like we shouldn't be worshiping a man. So they changed the name to High Desert Christian Fellowship and called it non-denominational and just said we preach the Bible, but and tell me if this was more my mom and less so the doctrine, but from what I understood, we went to a church that was strict fundamentalist Christian, and they can say non-denominational all they want, but it was very like Methodist in nature. For instance, you also were pressured to not listen to music that wasn't Christian music, for
Mhm.
example. Am I right?
Mhm. Yeah. And I think they were still, I don't think it was that they were gonna consider themselves non-denominational. They were saying that they were still Wesleyan Church,
Okay.
but they just took it out of the title. I think because people were kind of confused about what Wesleyan was in
Right.
a way, and I don't remember specifically if there was anything about, like, feeling like it was some kind of cult, but, I mean, I could understand. I mean, if
Yeah.
anything, it was probably more just because of, like, the fundamentalist views kinda thing.
Did you at the time feel that my mom's views were extreme, or did you feel that they fit in with the church?
It's kind of both because I feel like they did fit with the church, but she was just definitely on the more extreme, like, I don't wanna say flamboyant because she wouldn't be that would but it's kinda like just out there, kind of like she was definitely way more vocal, and, like, other people might have held the same beliefs, but
Mm.
they were more subdued in, like, their vocalization of their beliefs, I think.
Yeah, she was like the prosecutioner, like, she would bring the gavel down in
Mhm.
that church, and I think it was kind of a self-appointed
Mhm.
role of, authority coming
Mhm.
from her. And then, come to find out recently, like within the past decade, I mean, the church no longer exists, but in the past decade, she and her husband were providing marital counseling for the congregation. And just so everybody knows, my mom didn't even go to college. They are absolutely not educated or certificated in that area. And also just the idea of her telling other couples how to treat each other, that's another subject, but it's laughable, okay, that she would be in that position, but again, self-appointed, and it was such a small niche church that there was, like,
Mhm.
nobody was gonna stand up to her. Everyone was kind of very, like, mild-tempered, except
Mhm.
for her. That's
Yeah.
actually kind of true too, as I'm thinking about it, because like, you and I are still in touch, we're still friends with Lori, and you're very gentle, Lori's very gentle. I don't consider myself gentle now, but, like, I definitely when I went there was, like, timid and I feel like
Mhm.
everyone was very mild-mannered and timid ish,
Mhm. Yeah.
except for her.
Mhm. Yeah.
Huh.
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think she maybe liked that it was very small and she could kinda just I mean, I she took me to the church when I was, like, 3 or 4, so I had been there for a few years before you came. And so what I'm curious about is your deconstruction because it took me until mid to early 20s to even consider other ways of being. Well, first of all, I wasn't allowed to. And then when I left, I continued going to church. You and I were going to church together. But I was really asking myself some questions and I started reading books that countered Christianity. And I had an incident at one of the churches we went to where I felt very strongly that one of the pastors was lying from the pulpit. And I had a meeting with him about it. And I
Mhm.
didn't like the stuff that he said. And I just started tiptoeing away from it. And since then, I've really been doing the hard work of deconstruction because it's in my assessment, it kind of is never ending. You don't realize how much of your identity and just the way you go through the world in your brain is tied up in really harmful ideologies that we were taught.
Right.
So I'm curious about your doorway out and what opened your mind and made you curious about what you were being taught and the validity of it.
Like, in general or, like, our old church?
Oh, that's a good q so, yeah, to be clear, we both left that church, and when we moved to Rancho, we found sort of like big kind of the mega churches that I think we probably wanted to go to when we were younger. I
Mhm.
There was one bigger church where we grew up called Victor Valley Church, and it was like the cool church. It was kind of like our version of a mega church, and I know we went to it a couple of times, but, like, I was never allowed to miss our church to go to it, so typically I didn't go. But we kind of found some mega churches, like, in our area when we moved. Was there something that happened at one of the church? Because for me, one of the mega church pastors' sermons really I was certain that he was lying, telling a sensationalized story, and that became my first window, like opening a window and kind of like looking outside of it. And I had not never even allowed myself to do that before. And
Yeah.
I think once I opened that window, I started to educate myself, and then I ended up fully feeling like it wasn't just the church that we went to specifically that I was not in agreement with, or even
Mm.
it wasn't just the type of Christianity that we were exposed to that I wasn't in agreement with, which I'm not.
Mm.
But it wasn't just that, it was the whole doctrine. And then I started studying world religions and found out for the very first time, because I hadn't been allowed to access books that weren't Christian books, that, oh, Christianity is not the actually the oldest religion. And so many other world religions have, for instance, an origin story that is a virgin birth story. And
Yeah.
and I remember taking that information to my mom and saying, "Did you know that there are other world religions that predate Christianity that also have a virgin birth story where their Messiah comes through being born of a virgin?" And she just said, "No, there aren't." And I said, "No, there are. And I've been studying them and you can like look it up. This is historical fact." No, it's not. Christianity is the oldest religion and it's the only one with I don't know what you're talking about. That's not true. And I was kind of like, okay, so I'm not going to be able to discuss this. I'm just going to do my own
Right.
learning. What was your journey with that?
I will say before I jump into that, leaving the old church, the experience there, I was getting to a point because I was at church all the time. Like, they
Yeah.
sucked up all of my time.
Yeah.
I was going to school full time. I was working. I was expected to do, like, I don't know, like 10 different things at the church for free. So I was just burning out. I needed a break. And when I asked for a break, I thought that the pastor understood what I was asking for, and then, like, a few days later, he's calling to ask me about doing something else
Mhm.
on Sunday when I'm there, and I was like, "I'm not gonna be there on
Mm.
Sunday," and
Mm.
he, like, actually raised his voice at me in response to, like, me not being at church, and I said, "Yeah, I'm not gonna be there for at least 2 months." He wasn't trying to accept my answer, thought that,
Mhm.
whatever, I should be in church.
Mm.
And so I think it wasn't even a full month later that I got a letter from the board that it was, I mean, your mom wrote it, but it was like a letter from the board
The
that
board.
I needed to return the keys to the church. And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, like I was just taking a break, honestly. Like I was kind of giving myself space to be like, do I want to leave this or is this just a
Yeah.
break?" I don't know. And
Yeah, you were
so
using your brain and listening to your body and making a personal decision. I didn't
yes,
know this,
and
but that's
yes, and
so her. Okay.
yes, that I
Wow.
needed to return the keys to the church. So I was like, "Oh, well, okay, that's my answer. Like I'm not going
Yeah.
back." So, um, so that was
Wow.
my departure from that church.
Wow,
And then,
Colleen, I didn't know that.
yeah, yeah, yes.
She did
Uh,
that to me similarly once when I went for a drive because she was tormenting me and I was losing my mind, and I said, "I need to go for a drive," and she said, "If you go for a drive, you will never be allowed back at this home." And
yeah,
I went for a drive and she took my when I got back, she removed my house key from my keys
wow.
and was like, and I think that was the week that I ended up getting, like, officially kicked out for watching VH1, but,
Okay.
she loves revoking keys. I didn't know that
Yeah.
that happened to you. Wow. So how did that feel? Were
Oh, well,
you what was that emotion?
I think I think part of it, like, it was well, it was consistent for me because I think, like, I had had someone tell me at the time when I was dealing with that, like, that he had said which is interesting because he spoke so much truth at the time. I feel like since he's, like I wouldn't agree with the opinions he has now, I would say, but, like, at the time, his opinion was basically, like, give yourself space and I think that'll tell you a lot. Like, do you miss it or do or don't you? And also the response like to me asking for a break would tell me a lot. That's the other thing he said.
Mm.
And so that
Mm.
tracked because
Mm.
the pastor raised his voice when I asked for
Mhm.
a break and like basically yelled at me.
Mhm.
Um I don't remember exactly what he said, but I just remember the raised voice.
Mm.
And then the fact that like also I was giving myself space and I didn't miss it.
Mm.
But I had been there for like 12 years, I think, or something like that at the time. So it was like, and I was like, wow, I don't miss it at all. Like
Wow.
this is weird. And so then that was just kind of like the final nail for me that I was like, oh, okay, like that's fine. So I think it would have
Mm.
probably hurt more had those other things, like had I had maybe like a positive response to want asking for a break, had I like actually missed it, like it probably would have hurt more but I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, "All right, good." Like, it was just
Also, because we have other churches to compare it to as well, like, our church was so lame, like, it was not fun, I mean, I think it was a lack of money in the biggest
yeah,
way, but, like,
yeah.
I remember when we got 2, like, kinda small TV screens so that the lyrics could go up during
Mhm.
church service. Remember how, like, a big of a
Instead
deal
of
that was?
using the projector,
Wow. And the
right?
projector with the
That
lyrics, we
was
were like, "Oh, we're fancy."
the projector was well, no, the projector was like the old school projector. That was the first things that I had to do was, like,
Yeah, you
um,
ran the projector
was
around.
but no, the projector when we first started, when you were little, was like the actual, like, old school projector that it was like you'd put the, like, clear sheet on it on
Yeah,
top
the
of it,
transparencies, yeah.
and then you'd put it up on the like, that's what we
Oh,
had.
you're right, because then we did get the updated, like, projector where we didn't need the transparencies, huh, and that was a big
Right,
deal.
right. But the TV screens and, like, the PowerPoint thing, like, was like, "Okay, we're upscale now."
I
Um,
forgot about the
yeah,
transparencies.
yeah,
Wait,
that
so
was
who
like
made those? Were you in charge of printing them?
yeah, I had to make those. Yeah.
Dang.
Uh,
Yeah, and
yeah.
another thing about our church, there were so
Mhm.
few members that,
Oh, yeah.
like, we all had a job automatically. So,
Mm,
like,
yeah.
I think my mom was making the
Mm,
bulletin, you were doing the projector. I was, like, arbitrarily asked to be in the choir even though, like, I don't s like, I shouldn't be singing, you
right.
know?
But yes, I know.
Yeah, none of us, like, we were just like, "Okay." It was automatic that me, you, and, like, 2 other young women, I think, were just
Right,
that we were the choir. It was, like,
right.
everyone in the congregation on a good and also, like, on a good day, what, 20 people? 30?
I
20?
think probably, like, 30. I think there were occasionally, like I mean, maybe I don't know if we ever got to 50, but I feel like there would be,
Maybe
like,
on, like,
a
Easter.
special right, like, probably something like that, yeah.
Well, then
Mhm. But
left that church, and then was it, when we moved to Rancho that you started exploring other churches?
well, I had started going to the other service when I left, and
Mm,
so I was going to that after I left the church, our church. Oh, that's the other thing I was gonna say. When there was like that one event, that one time that I think the old pastor, it was like some celebration that they were having, and I think it had been a good like 8 years or something. Well, no, it hadn't been that long. Maybe 5 years or something, like, since we had been there, and we went to this celebration thing because they invited us because we were, like, old members or whatever, and literally, I just remember being there and I was like, "Nothing has changed." Like,
yeah.
it was so weird. They're singing the same songs, they're doing the same thing, like, everything it was, like, the weirdest thing to be
Same
like,
messages. That was another thing,
yeah.
like, it was kind of like the messages from the pulpit, from the pastor were also very repetitive. I'm sure you went back and you were like, "Wait, this was the sermon when I was here 8 years ago."
I just remember being like, I felt like it was, like, the weirdest thing because I was like, I've a I've moved on for since now,
Yeah,
but, like, they are still doing exactly the same thing. So,
yeah.
obviously, I guess that's I mean, because I feel like right after that or soon after that was when they shut their doors forever. So,
Right.
it's like, "Okay, that makes sense." But I guess to get back to the part about stepping away altogether. I think it was more like there was a couple of things that I think I mean, if I look back, I think where I started having I think some difficulty with things was honestly kind of like getting into social work because
Mm,
like when I was in school, I remember like learning so much about social work and really seeing it as being a space where this would be how Jesus would want us to treat people.
mm.
It's like helping the people that need help and like, speaking up for people that don't really have a voice and like, advocating
Listening,
for
being
people,
supportive.
like accepting people for who they are, loving more unconditionally and things like that. And like all of that, I feel like social work, I feel like embodies a lot of that. I wouldn't say, I mean, I'm not saying that 100% of social workers
Sure.
follow are that, but I will say as a profession that's what its intent is.
Mm.
And I was like, this is confusing because this is
Yeah.
really more of like what the church should be,
Wow.
but it's not, so it kind of just confused. I feel like it just created a lot of confusion for
Yeah.
me in that space. And I mean, I still was going to church for a while and all of that, and then I really came down to like where I was just dealing with just very overwhelming circumstances with work and a lot of other things going on in my life, and it was like I had been sharing a lot of what I was going through with people in the church, and I was like, everything that was being communicated was like, to be connected was like you need to be in a small group and you need to be serving, and then like that's your kind of the key to being connected.
Mm.
And so I was doing these things and I was sharing, in my small group, and I was like what I was going through and how I was really struggling. And like I was serving and I enjoyed it and whatever. And felt, I don't know, like I
You were
was
you
serving.
it was you were used to it too. It was like your routine was acts of service and being supportive, and yeah.
Right. And so it just got to, for me, I was going through like a significant like time of like really deep depression. And like I was telling people like I'm not okay. And like no one checked on me. No one followed up on that at all. And that just like really hurt. Like that was a deep hurt on that one. And I
Mm,
was like, and I tried to excuse it, I feel like in some ways, because I was like, well, people are not always comfortable with mental health and like that kind of thing. And I felt like it just hurt. But I was
mm,
trying to like, I wasn't ready to kind of like step away from that space. And so around 2 months or so after I had, I had surgery, and again, like basically no one. Again, everybody
Mm.
knew that I was stepping away from things to have surgery, and no one checked on me. And I was
And
like,
after you had given so much to them
right,
and
yes.
in
And I
support positions.
right. And it was like, that's a very like, to me, I was like, that's a very easy thing to, like, check on someone after surgery, to say
And
like,
you would
"Hey,
also think since you were such a big part of the church, they would all band together and, like, send you a care package, like something, like
something," yeah, like, there's something done, and there was nothing, and in contrast to that, I had my coworkers, most of whom were social workers, checking on me nonstop
wow.
while I'm out of work, while I'm gone. It's not like out of sight, out of mind. I think that that was very much what I felt like the church was to me. It was like, if I was not physically in your face, you don't know where I am. Like, you're not going to check on me. You're not going to, like, you don't know, I don't know. It just seemed very odd. And it was just, again, such a stark contrast that, like, all these people who I think, I mean, the commonality was that they were all mostly all social workers. And I felt like, okay, these are the people that get me, but they wouldn't, they're literally like, there was never more than one day that would go by without one of them checking on me. And it's not like they're clearly not like
Wow.
having like a list of like, oh, make sure like, okay, did you check on her? Did you, it's nothing like that. It was just naturally like who they are to be like checking on me, making sure I'm okay. Like, coming, like a couple of them came and brought me food. What my
And
name
let
I
me
mean,
ask you this,
yeah, sorry,
up
my name
until that point, did you subscribe to the belief, as I did,
mhm.
that the best people are Christians and those are the people that you can trust, and if somebody isn't a Christian, they don't have your best interest in mind? And were you of that mindset that, like, Christians were the safe people, the ones you could rely on?
I didn't see that 100% as the truth. I feel like that was more so true at the old church, like, I definitely strongly felt that. I
Got
think
it.
that was kind of like getting going back to getting into social work, going through, like, getting my master's or in that program. I think that's where I was kind of starting to see the variations there. So I didn't necessarily, but I did count, I would say I did count on the church as my, like, main support system, I would say,
Right,
and I felt like that's who they were supposed to be, and I was like,
right.
"Wow, they're not there at all." Like, "Okay," and so I just never went back. It still really hurts, like, I still feel like I'm healing from that
Mhm.
because it is very much, I felt like I was just taken advantage of that whole time. I was in that space for almost 16 years, like, at that specific church. I
Providing free labor for them.
right. I just have chosen to, like, not go back to those spaces because I'm just like, I just feel like it's just such an unhealthy dynamic. Like, it's just expected to, like, have
Mhm.
to do so much. It's not so much like, "Oh, you have to be there 100% of the time for me." I'm not like that
Yeah.
person, but I'm also you
It's
need
when
to
you're
be
going through something and they know about it.
Mhm. So I just was like, I'm done, and there was other relationships that I was like, I'm done. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it anymore. There's still parts of that that are definitely very hurtful.
It makes sense. It's like leaving a relation it's
It is.
worse than leaving a relationship because you're also leaving an entire ideology that was attached to those relationships.
Mhm. Yeah.
And, I'm proud of you for making that decision, and I know I can imagine how hard that was and how heartbreaking it was to realize that this community that I'm sure always felt like, "Well, at least I have this community of support." They'll be there for me, I'm there for them, and then, these 2 crucial moments for them not to be there for you, you know, it's similar to an imbalanced relationship,
Mhm.
and to be able to say, "You know what? No, this doesn't feel good, and I am worth more than this, and maybe these people aren't who they said they were." And to leave, I think, is very bold, especially when you know that there's not gonna be closure, and then you just kinda have to do that work yourself, and there's going to be unhealed hurt. Like, that's a brave thing to do, and I'm glad that you did it. And, I'm glad it happened just because I too have come to see the harm in religion in general, but in the type of Christianity that we subscribe to, there's so much harm in it, and there's so many elements to those belief systems that, I don't subscribe to anymore. And so I like I'm glad that I was given a doorway out, and I'm glad that you were given a doorway out, regardless of how painful and confusing, not only saying, "You know what? This doesn't seem right to me," and walking away, 'cause I had a, similar situation, but I didn't experience the heartbreak like you did. So,
Mhm,
I would say my walking away was perhaps less painful.
mhm,
But to be able to walk away and not necessarily know what's next, or, when I officially decided, like, "Yeah, I don't actually agree with this anymore. I don't think I'm a Christian."
mhm,
That the aftermath of that for, I would say, a year to 2 years was dark for me. I Because you go from, "I know the answer. I have the answer. I also have been tasked with spreading awareness of the answer that I have." It's your entire identity. It's your whole life is this ideology and the awareness that we have been chosen and therefore we are to spread the good news. To go from knowing who you are in that regard, knowing what you're here to do in that regard, to none of that, to removing all of that and just being like, well, what is true? And what do I believe? And who am I? And what am I here for me was a dark place. Here's the thing though, for me, Christianity, mostly because of my mom, was also a very dark place.
mhm,
So it wasn't necessarily, I don't know if I could say it was worse, but I just felt like, at least when I was a Christian, and also I had suicidal ideations throughout my life, and I was tormented every day, mm, in my home, and so there was that, but, like, at least I thought I knew some shit. Then
mm,
when I sort of was like, "All right, I admit that I don't know anything, and now
mhm,
I have to, like, seek what does feel right to me," that was an area of such tremendous apathy. I had nothing to cling to. My sense of self had been completely destroyed. I hated myself. I didn't understand why I needed to survive because of the way I was raised and stuff. But then giving up my belief system too, I was like, well, I am a walking black hole. That's what it felt like. I couldn't, it was just like, and I also had so much anger, and just like anger, depression, rage at what I had been through. And I was just kind of like, I mean, outside of my career, at the time I was in school to become a teacher, and that was very much my focus for for 12 years.
mhm,
That helped. I had that to focus on, like to think about. But outside of that, going from thinking the one true answer to maybe I was wrong, was I got through it and I found spirituality, and I still continue to kind of like work with that, and I don't ever feel required to choose a belief system again, or to believe that what I ascribe to is the truth. I never again will I need that, because of
mhm,
like what we've been through. But
right,
I've definitely worked on healing and self-love and therapy and education and stuff, and that's my light now, is being able to have access to
mhm,
information. I mean, even that, or being able to heal enough to feel my own feelings, or to know what it is that I want, or to accept myself. That was a I had to work from hating myself and feeling like I was truly not even worth a glance in my direction, into
mhm.
self-acceptance, into really caring for myself and showing myself self-love. The whole self-life thing has been such a journey. But do you remember what that was like in the aftermath? You realize that these people aren't there for you in the way that you always thought that they were. You start to unravel your belief system. Did you feel like you were in, or perhaps even still are, a period of like just the vast unknown? And like, how do you replace feeling like you have all the answers and you don't even ever have to seek answers again because they're all embedded in your belief system, and then into maybe not?
Yeah.
Is that a feeling of freedom for you, or is it a feeling of, is there fear? Is it darkness? Like, what is that like for you?
I'm still figuring it out, I would say. I feel like it's very much layered, and it
Mm,
just there'll be things that come up at different times, and I think this past Christmas, I think, was, like, a bigger time for me of, like, what is it that I do now for Christmas? What is it like, so much of it was tied into the church and like in traditions of like
Mhm.
church traditions essentially for Christmas. And I was like, what does Christmas look like now? Like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't even know what I consider myself at this point. I'm just
I
kind of like,
know, same. I went through I called myself an agnostic because I didn't ever get into like atheism because I do still I like to believe in magic. I believe in the power. I don't believe in a all-knowing creator necessarily, but I believe in obviously like forces stronger than myself and smarter, intelligence in our vast unknowable universe, and I love looking into the science of that, and even like I still believe in magical idealism. I do. I like that. And in a lot of ways Christianity prepared us for that cuz you have to Noah's ark is literal. God can do anything, just all the animals swam. Even the ones that couldn't swim, they swam. They
mhm,
all just met at this one place on the plant on planet Earth, and if you have any questions about that, the answer is just God can do anything.
mhm,
That it really does stretch your your ability to believe in shit. And
mhm,
so I still subscribe to like magical belief systems and stuff, but I still kind of call myself an agnostic because I can't use the word God. The word God is totally tainted for me now. So I can't say like, "Oh, just ask God," but I do ask the universe. But
mhm,
and I've changed what I'm comfortable saying, and it kind of is always in flux, and maybe it will be for you as well. And I also want to speak to what you said about like when you're watching the news, it's like, okay, well, now I have to reprocess this information through a new lens, or at least with the removal of the one lens that we had to use to process everything. And it requires you to process all of your political beliefs over again. And like I had to do a lot of work around abortion personally and a woman's right to choose. And I did that in sort of like healing spaces and in with my experience with the MDMA therapy for PTSD in those spaces. I
mhm.
worked through my beliefs around abortion because like, at our church, obviously abortion is baby murder, and we would have, do you remember that like we had like an abortion day and there were like the fetuses?
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
it's like this is the baby that you're murdering and stuff, and of course I believed that. That's that marketing, who wants to kill babies? Nobody. So I very much subscribed to that, and then I remember having to really work through that because I thought if I got pregnant, I knew I didn't want to have a kid by that point, and I thought like, but I could never kill a baby, and I had to work through that on a spiritual level. What do I actually believe about conception and a woman's right to choose? And you have to work through, I mean, I've changed my political affiliation. I was obviously a registered Republican until honestly until like Obama era, and having to restructure how you feel about social issues, how you feel about world issues, how you
mhm,
feel, and also how you feel about yourself. Because I feel, as I've done a lot of work looking back, like Christianity is so disempowering, and we're taught you're imperfect, and that's kind of at the center of your awareness of self. Like you're always falling short of the glory of God. You always have to be repenting. If you have an answer, if you have a problem, just ask God. And if you're still having the problem, well, then there's something wrong with your walk. Like, so for instance, when you were depressed at your last church,
oh,
the
yeah.
reason that they couldn't help you is because you just need to, why aren't you praying about it? Well, what's going
Yeah,
on in
yeah,
your walk with the Lord that's making you depressed? They just put it back on you. There is no, what other support can they even offer other than, sweetheart, you really need to be reading your Bible more, it sounds like.
right. Well, that was actually what I was told because at our old church, when I was dealing with depression at that time, I was told that it was because I wasn't praying enough because I didn't
Yeah.
have enough faith. And
Yeah.
that was what it was. It was never like there was never a mention of like therapy, anything like that. Like it was never that was yeah.
Also, thank God, because you know who would have been your therapist? My mom. One of the biggest gifts in my life that I don't take for granted were those healing spaces that I was invited into in my mid-20s and the MDMA and working through so much of the trauma that I had. I think that that took me from being suicidal and just full of self-hatred into what has now become love for myself.
Mhm,
And I think without that, I probably would just still be really figuring it out and I had a similar experience to yours, which was that all of these people who were staunchly anti-religious, very, what my mom would call new age, very open-minded, spiritual people, men and women, they were so welcoming and they just like wanted to support me and help me. And I remember driving home after the first weekend that I did this MDMA like healing weekend sessions. I was like, these people want to support me just because they want to. There's no God that they're pleasing by being so kind to me. There's no doctrine that is telling them they have to be. They just want to help me. I
Mhm.
remember it was simultaneously the best feeling I had ever experienced. Just like this exists. People who aren't Christians but can care about others. Like it was so new to me because I was so sheltered. It was
Mm.
simultaneously so like amazing, but also very confusing and confronting. And that was when I started to first unravel, oh, I've been lied to. It's not that if they're a Christian, then they're safe, trustworthy, and good and want to support you. And if they're not a Christian, run because they're evil. It's not only is that not true, but where I'm at now, it's like the opposite is a lot of the time true, and a
Mm.
lot of this is based on my experience, but a lot of the people who are so rigid about the doctrine just really love control and they want to use it against you and they want to cause you pain and suffering and they want to feel superior because this doctrine and being chosen and having the answer is the one thing that a lot of these people have to feel superior to others. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, in the case of, I would say both of my parents, that's a huge selling point for them. Like, oh, I can be told I have the answer and that it's
Mhm.
my job to just take this one book and make everybody else read it. Great. Like, it gives you a reason to talk down to everybody forever. It also the whole chosen idea, that idea of like, I am important and I've been chosen by God used to really fuel me too, because obviously I was taught that. Then I got to the point where I was exploring other belief systems and I was like, wait, I'm chosen, but so is everybody else that's ever walked the face of the planet. So like Jeffrey Epstein is held in the same regard in,
Right.
according to Jesus as I am. Like, so we're
Mhm.
all chosen. So then why does
Mhm.
it even matter if I just
Right.
started to unravel it. But for
Mhm.
somebody who really has no sense of self outside of that, no education, also no curiosity, like
Right.
the types of people that are like, oh, thank God, there's just that one book. Great. Because I didn't want to read any other books anyway. For those types of people, it's
Mhm.
perfect.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
perfect. All you have to do is read this one book. The work is over. Like we've done it for
Right.
you. Just repeat this to everybody. There's a type of person that really, really thrives in those settings. And, come to find out, you're not that type of person. Come to find out, I'm not the type of person. You and I are both very similar in that, like, I mean, I am no longer a teacher, but my career was like being of service and helping others. And yours still is. You're an adjunct professor, you're a social worker. Like you want to be of service and supportive and help people heal. And surprise, surprise, we don't have to be a Christian in order to feel that way. Like
Mhm.
morality exists outside of Christianity. I was taught that it didn't. I was taught
Mhm.
that if you weren't a Christian, you had no morals.
Right.
And then
Mhm.
it's like we both had the experience where in these spaces of people who were not Christians at all, or
Right.
perhaps in your case, maybe some of them even were, but that wasn't the sticking point and it wasn't the motivator for bringing people together. They were just
Mhm.
people and they showed us love unconditionally. And
Mhm.
it was like, oh,
Mhm.
maybe I've been misled.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And, when you found the church, you were 15. So you were young and pliable. And
Right.
so, and I was younger than you. And we both were just believing what we were told. And
Mhm.
we were told this is the way to get into heaven. And, the marketing around Christianity still to this day very strong, come here, come as you are, be saved. You never have to hurt again. And all of your answers, you have this source now that you're connected to, and they're here to solve all of your problems. And not only that, you are of the chosen, like you're smart enough to see the light. it's such a powerful message, and I think it really preys upon vulnerable people. I mean, my mom was at rock bottom. She also was suicidal. She was going through divorce with my dad. She had nothing to live for. She prayed that God would take her life every night. I know this because she would tell me all the time. And then it was like you have this space and you have these people saying, "Sweetheart, your problems end now." Yeah, who's not going to sign up for that? Especially
Right.
when you have no other access to any conflicting information, you know?
Right. When you were saying like, oh, that was the first time I read, I'm now no longer a Republican kind of thing. It was like, well, I think I definitely had way more liberal beliefs that I think I was just in groups. I think I just wouldn't say anything because I was like,
Wow.
not, I just didn't feel comfortable speaking up
Well,
about
yeah, because
something.
you were attacked for your outfit. I mean, imagine even saying the wrong thing. You were just
Right.
existing at that point and you were attacked and called a bad person, and then your mom was attacked and she was called a terrible mother. Yeah, I can imagine, like, why would you ever speak up? And that's also interesting to know because I didn't know that about you. I didn't know that you had, like, progressive beliefs, and so good job for not,
I,
revealing that to me and being more of
well,
a bad influence.
no, I
Thank
think
you for
well, I think
sparing me your demonic beliefs of that more people deserve love,
I, I
or that gay people
I
aren't
think
going to hell.
I think that it was probably more after leaving that church though. It was probably more that's when I started. I feel like my beliefs kind of started shifting a little bit, like as far as like
Interesting.
being more because I
Open-minded.
feel like I was more pressured into being like, this is how we believe. Like this is how you're supposed to like this is what you're supposed to do. I mean, even just some things like, same-sex marriage and things like that.
Mhm.
And what's the problem with it? Like, it was
Yeah.
kind of just like one of those type of things when those would come up. I'm like, I mean, honestly, there's part of me now that's just like, well, I feel bad because like I feel like I should have spoken up in some of those spaces.
Mm.
Do I really care if these people didn't like me? Like I should have just spoken up.
Yeah. But I
But
think
I
you
mean,
just you
it's
can start now. I mean, not that you'll be in those settings anymore, but I relate to guilt. I mean, and also just subscribing wholeheartedly to so many beliefs that now, I'm so at the other end of the spectrum of homosexuality is a great one because, like, it was just no questions asked. It was evil, and that was the whole story because it said it in the Bible. And we have to pray for our gay brothers and sisters because once they're also everyone's in the clutches of Satan, right? Everyone
right.
except for the cruel, domineering, abusive people in charge. Those are the ones chosen by God who are ruining everybody's lives, filling everybody with shame, making me cry every single day. Like those
Right.
were the pious ones, and everybody else who want to be more accepting, want to be more open minded, want to show love to more types of people. Satan. It's
Mhm.
just so backwards. And, the whole Trump presidency has really clarified a lot for me personally because I'm just like, it's so clear to see that that is like an evil man, and he is evil in every
Mm.
regard. There's not an ounce of goodness or truth or integrity in that cretin. And to watch these same Christians, who really harmed us, cling to him, put his memorabilia on the wall, stand by him, praise him, vote for him, at the very least. But then, like, I mean, my parents have his memorabilia on the wall. That is like, okay, it's been backwards this whole time. Not only is it not just simply untrue, the good guys are like, it's such a mind fuck for me.
Mm.
The Trump presidency has been so clear. It's just like, okay, I have no further questions. Like it's backwards and it's always been backwards. But that's also wild because then it's like, but these were beliefs that we clung to
Right.
for years, like decades.
Yeah.
And does
Yeah.
that mess with your ability to trust yourself? Because it does for me. I'm like, what is my internal compass? And I have to like reevaluate what my internal compass is and what it's telling me. Do you experience that?
I don't think quite as much. I feel like there's part of me actually that is when it comes to some of those type of things, I think that part of me is grounded in the idea of like that I've realized that I'm much more like my grandma. Like my
Mm,
grandma's passed since, she passed at 101. But she surprisingly my grandpa was like a Presbyterian minister,
Mm,
um, and they spent a lot of years in ministry, but the both of them were very progressive, very,
mm,
very progressive. And they were just like, did not like bat an eye when my uncle came out, like did not like, had no problem with that. And also would just be like, I mean, literally calling out on social issues that were like, that is not what Jesus would do. Like,
right.
what are these people doing? And so I feel like there is part of me, I think, that being rooted in like the belief that like people matter. I feel like being part of those conversations with her, like in her
Mm.
90s. I see it now. And I think when things come up, I'm like, oh yeah, I hear my inner dialogue and I'm like, yeah, that's my grandma.
That's so
No,
cool. That's like she's a
like,
guidepost for you.
yeah. I think the one other thing that I think that we should bring up was Sewell.
Thank you. That's the last thing on my list and the next thing on my list. Okay,
Okay.
so so what we need you to understand. Once again, very small church, very low budget church. Also, wouldn't you say like throughout the congregation, high rates of like addiction, severe mental illness? I mean, I remember we had congregation members who did not have teeth. Like,
Mm,
they were people that were really struggling. Okay, so that was,
mhm.
like, the population of our church, wouldn't you say?
Yes. Yes,
Okay,
sorry.
so there were not a lot of other than my mom herself appointed authority, there were not a lot of, like, people who were like, "Oh, I know how things should be done," and here like, we were all just making shit up as we went along and doing our best, and,
Mhm,
you and I were children when we were first at that church, so we were, doing our best, and it wasn't like we could look to other people for a lot of rational advice or guidance or real world experience because the population of our church was, like, strange. So, okay, so we are all arbitrarily part of the choir. Colleen, myself, and 2 other teens,
but there
3?
was
Okay, so we had a choir and then we decided and maybe you have more memories, but we decided to kind of turn the choir into a group, like a singing group, and we wanted to do performances, like,
was the kid
beyond the church.
it was the kids group,
Okay.
the kids choir, basically,
The
yeah.
kids choir, and we wanted to brand ourselves, we wanted to come up with a name, and we wanted to get shirts made, and we were practicing routines, and we were gonna go perform at the mall.
You had the little wreaths with the ribbons on it.
We went to Michael's craft store and we got wreaths, small wreaths that were about this big that were made from twine, and then we bought long I think blue and white were our colors,
I believe so, yeah.
and we
Mhm.
bought long blue and white ribbons, we tied them to the wreath, and so a lot of our choreography would consist of doing figure eights with these wreaths that had ribbons attached to it, like ribbon dancers, okay? But that's not even the best part. We deliberated over what are we gonna call ourselves, right? And we were like, "Okay, well, it's probably should be a word that's also an acronym, right?" So, but we started with the phrase first, and that maybe that's where we went wrong. We started with the words and then we made them an acronym rather than taking a word and trying to assign words to each letter.
Mhm.
And where we started was singing out of love. And it was like we all agreed that we wanted to be called singing out of love. And that was the only thing we could come up with. And we were like, well, what that spells is SOOL, but we'll just call it soul. Like it'll singing out of love is SOOL, and we will pronounce it soul. And as a collective, with the adults who were in charge too, they were like, everyone was like, yes, this is the
Well,
absolute best.
the other part of it was that I remember Lori and I believe, and it maybe other people that said, "What about singing of unconditional love?"
So I remember that, but I
It's
don't
like,
remember
no.
that ever being brought up until after we had everything printed. And then someone was like, it very easily could have been singing of unconditional love. And I remember going, oh, but we had already performed. We had had the shirts printed.
I feel like I don't know. I feel
You
like
said it
I
before, and they were like, "Oh, no, Soul is the."
I think it was like, no, this is what we decided.
Okay, that's so funny
Think,
that
I
that
don't
would
I
have
don't
come up during the I mean, it even makes sense though, because again, like not firing on all cylinders. And we weren't either, right? Like,
Right. Yeah.
we were sheltered. That was also our environment.
Right.
So we got these white polo shirts. Our logo was a dove and then big letters SOOL.
Wow.
And so people would be like, Soul? And every time we'd have to go, no, it's soul. And it stands for singing out of love. So then we go and we get the shirts made. Of course, they're polos. And of course our colors are blue and white. It's like school uniform vibes.
Yeah.
And we
Mhm.
would practice the choreography was always, I just remember it was transferring figure eight,
Right.
like that wreath from hand to hand, and then sometimes we would do a spin, right? And we thought that this was so like monumental and that we had to spread the word of God
Like,
by performing, taking Soul on the road. And we would go
you went
to
to
the
the
local
mall,
mall,
performed at the mall. Yeah.
performed at the mall with a big sign that said Soul. And of course, everybody who saw us or would talk to us or would ask questions, everyone was like, "What's Soul?" And we were like, "It's soul." But the problem is, it wasn't soul. It was Soul. And
Mhm.
the fact that it was always Soul. We never updated it.
Mhm.
And the explanation was always like, it just has to be spelled that way because it's singing out of love. And it could have been so easy. Singing of unconditional love, like just pick a word that starts with you, just pick one.
Right.
There's so many. Like, or
Right.
maybe not there are so many, but unconditional is right there.
Right. Yeah. And the fact that, like, yes, adults were, like, involved and like, "Yeah, yeah."
Why would we misspell the word that is the name of our group? Anyway, I somewhere, probably in my dad's garage at this point, but I have photos of us performing with the Soul and like the Soul. Probably, I don't know if there was like a projector at the mall or what we did, but
Yeah.
I have Soul photos somewhere, but not accessible. Do you
Well,
have any Soul photos?
yeah. Remember when you looked through that album when you were at
Was
my house?
Soul in there?
There was the Soul picture in there, so maybe I'll have to, like, post it on Patreon or something.
That's the thing. So text it to me and I will. I'm gonna post that. I also want to post the voicemail because myself and another girl from the church, we recorded a voicemail song for Colleen's home phone, like landline phone. And it's a very like Weird Al-esque like take on the Four Non Blondes song, What's Going On. But I rewrote the lyrics to be about you being away from home. And
Mhm.
then we sang it, and it was your outgoing message for a while.
Yes, and would confuse people sometimes because they were like, "Why is there singing on your"
We
and
also sang it so fast, I think you must have had, like, a 1-minute time limit or something, but it's like,
I think we
w
had to do it
you'll
or you guys had to do it a few times to fit it in before it would beep.
okay, that makes sense because it is sung really fast, so it's like, in
Yeah.
25 minutes, it'll be 6 o'clock. I've been calling Colleen since 5 o'clock on the dot. I don't know why she won't answer my phone call. And then it's like, "And I went to the window and I stood outside." It's, like, very silly. It's people trying to get a hold of you, and, like, we can't. And then it's like, "Colleen is gone," and I said, "Hey,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah."
Yeah,
I had totally forgotten about that, but Colleen
right.
still has the phone with the recording, and she
Because I
sent it
haven't
to me.
ever been able to get rid of it, like, I was like, "No, I have to because this message is on here and I have
Such
to
a
keep the
treasure.
phone," like, I
I'm
don't know.
so glad.
But
I'm
and then
so glad.
I don't know if you wanted to include too the voicemail that you had
Yeah.
on that I, for some reason, still had a voicemail from you on there too,
Yep.
that talked
I
about
think I'm,
not
like,
being able to call
19
me.
probably.
Probably, but you weren't able to call me because you didn't have enough minutes on your phone or something like that.
It's such a blast from the past, and it just reminds me of, like, how much fun you and I had. Like,
Yeah.
we if it weren't for you, I honestly do not know what I would have done at that church, but, like, we did fun, silly stuff a lot. Like, we put up those plays, like the Larry Flinger
Mhm.
show, that was all about it was pastors who verbally abused their congregation members, and we thought it was a joke at the time because he was kinda really mean to everybody, but then also in retrospect, we're like, maybe that was weird that he was really mean to everybody. But
Right.
we
Like,
wrote
that was
plays.
an episode.
Yeah, that's a part 2 for sure. Um, but
But
we did skits, we wrote skits for family camp, we wrote plays, put up plays, like, rewrote the lyrics of that song, made it your voicemail message. I also realized if I was raised in maybe a more traditional environment or like with parents who shit about shit, like I probably would have been encouraged to write because like it came naturally for me to like want to write a lot and write kind of comedy stuff.
Right.
And I think, yeah, if I were in a normal environment, they would have been like, "You should focus on that." It hasn't been until I've looked back where I'm like, "Oh, as a young child, I was, like, having the desire to write
Mhm.
plays and scripts and
Mhm.
comedy essays and stuff." I'm like, "Oh,
Right.
wow, that's actually that was I was showing an aptitude. Huh,
Right.
well,
For that,
oh,
yeah.
well."
But, I mean, you're writing stuff, from here
That's
and
true.
there, so
That's
there's
true.
that. Yeah.
But we
Um,
did we did have fun. We, like, made
yeah,
we made stuff fun. We laughed a lot.
yeah. And I mean, I don't know, 'cause I think that, I don't know, you start, for you, sorry. For you, I think that, like, yes, I started out, like, babysitting you, I feel like, but
Mhm.
then, and spending time with you at, the church or whatever, I feel like you wanted to hang out with me.
Oh, I
But
clung to you. Yeah.
yeah,
You were I mean, right when we would walk through the door, like, "Where's Colleen?"
yeah, yeah. And then, um, but I think that having you around, because I mean, I remember having you around at times when it's not like, obviously I wasn't babysitting you. I would just be like,
Mhm.
yeah, you can come over. That's fine. Like, I don't, I wouldn't mind you hanging out with me. So, but yeah, I just felt like it was always, for me, it was like I had always kind of wanted like a younger sister and I never got one. And so I was like, oh, this is like my little sister, like, kind
Totally.
of thing. So it was just completely, it
Yeah.
was a good thing for me too. Like, I felt like it was a good relationship to have
I
for me too.
agree.
Yeah.
And I think you kept me safer than I would have been otherwise because I was allowed to go spend, you know, long amounts of time at your house. And without that, I would have just been at home. And there was no joy for me there. There was no laughter for me there. There was no I couldn't do anything.
Mhm.
And there was life at your house where there wasn't at mine.
Mhm.
Like even just like making lunch and like watching TV and like walking Blake or something or playing with Blake or like her dog at the time. We would just like we would just have fun and there was life at your house
Mhm.
that I was allowed to go and live. Whereas if it weren't for you, I didn't go to anybody else's house. When I got into middle school and stuff, and then I made a couple Christian friends, I went to their house and stuff. But
Right.
you really were such a safe space for me and you gave me a place to go when I really, really needed it. And then for us to have come back together and connected at this time, both, because of what we've been through and we have this shared experience of growing up together. We were both in our formative years and having you
Mhm.
be a co-historian and validate my experience is I mean, in the same way, like you're the closest I could ever have to a sister is you because you were there. You were there, you were in my home, I was in your home, you were next to me, we were growing up together. Um, and vice versa. And I'm so sorry that my mom told you you were out of control. I'm so sorry that she harmed your mom as well. And it's also interesting to learn that she also used out of control on you because I got that every day. And it would
Yeah.
be like I'd be like if I was in like a good mood, like being like hyper, "You're
Mhm.
out of control." I would hear that all the time. "You're out of control." And I
Right.
remember being like, "Am I though?
Really?
Am I out of control? I
Yeah.
don't think I am."
Which I think the funny thing is, I mean, I don't know. It's like I'm glad for it, obviously, but I think it's just kind of like ironic that she thought that I was also out of control and that I was setting a bad example for you, but she would also let you spend time with me and like,
But
I would drink.
I also imagine that once she had that conversation with you, you probably dressed differently when you're around me.
Probably a little bit, but yeah,
Like, I
maybe.
think it was, like, a matter of you probably would wear, like, a short sleeve shirt and avoid the spaghetti
Like,
st like, I feel like there had to have been you catering to that demand, otherwise she probably would have kept me,
probably.
you know?
But I mean, I think too that she wanted kind of like she wanted a break, a break from
That's
being
true
a
too.
mom too. So it was
That's
like,
true too, because it wasn't like we were having fun together. She was always in dictator mode and like, I have to make you better and I have to punish you mode. And yeah, that's probably exhausting.
right. Well, and the part about like your mom not wanting to spend time in anybody's home that there's a male
Yeah,
figure in, and so, like, my dad didn't
that's
live with
true.
us, so it was like you had very limited options on, like,
Yeah.
houses that only had women in them, so it was like so
Yeah, so I wasn't allowed to go to anyone's house if they had a father. If there was a man in the home for the expressed purpose that that man was going to rape me and that that was gonna be a burden that I had to bear for the rest of my life because of the way that I looked, and that because of the way that I looked, men weren't gonna be able to help themselves. And so I was put through rape drills starting in very young childhood, to fight off them. She would play the man who was gonna come rape me, and I would have to fight her off. And so, yeah, yeah. Wow, thank God your parents were divorced, huh? Otherwise, that safe space would have been taken from me as well.
yeah. Well, and, apparently your friends had to be from a virgin birth, so that's why.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I know, it's so messed up.
Anyway,
But I'm so grateful for you, and I'm glad that we both got out, and it's comforting to have similar pain in a way, like to know that what we went through, which is very unique, like
mhm,
what we went through at that church is unique,
yeah,
and to have both come out the other side of it and to be back in touch and to be able to validate each other and stuff has been so wonderful, and I'm so grateful, and let's never not be in touch again.
agreed. Yes, I am
Soul
grateful.
forever. So we'll post some of these things on Patreon. Subscribe to Selfwife on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. You can follow me on Patreon and also subscribe to my YouTube, which is just Ani Easton Baker. I'm not going to ask them to subscribe to you because your page is private and you're a professional and yeah. But I'm so glad that you came on today, and thank you for being so patient with the tech issues.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I love you forever and always.
I love you too. Bye.
Bye.